never before seen details of the Trump Tower meeting that Donald Trump Jr. attended months before the election with a Russian lawyer who now admits to being a Russian informant. Trump Jr. took that meeting on the promise of getting dirt on Hillary Clinton from the Russian government. And don't forget, then campaign chairman Paul Manafort was in that meeting. So was the president's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner.
The Senate Judiciary Committee just published hundreds of pages of these interviews, including this exchange on the misleading statement that was put out a year after the Trump Tower meeting by the White House at the time. Quote, "The Washington Post has reported that your father was involved in drafting the July 8th statement. Is that correct?" The response from Donald Trump Jr. was, "I don't know. I never spoke to my father about it." But if you look at the exchange even further, he notes, he may have commented through Hope Hicks. Donald Trump Jr. very much open to the possibility that his father was involved in the drafting of that statement. Let's bring in CNN's Shimon Prokupecz in Washington with the very latest on what you're seeing there, Shimon.
Yeah, that's right, John. Certainly in reading some of what Don Jr. Has testified to, it's pretty lengthy in terms of the sheer number of pages of transcript here. And it's clear that Don Jr. Was sort of tricked here by the Russians in some ways. This meeting, he thought, was going to be about perhaps some dirt on Hillary Clinton, and then quickly evolved into something about adoptions and the Magnitsky Act. And it seems, at least he's trying to distance himself concerning matters, whether or not he knew that this was going to come up. And then, as you said, John, concerning the statements that were eventually issued by the White House and others concerning the nature of this meeting, an issue that is now before the special counsel and something that is under investigation. Don Jr. Had this to say, and when asked about whether or not he knew what kind of details the president may have provided, what kind of edits he may have made to the statements, he said that essentially he wasn't sure, but the best of his knowledge, that Hope Hicks, he may have commented, that is, the president may have commented through Hope Hicks, John.
So what more, Shimon, are you learning as you go through this testimony in these transcripts about what Donald Trump Jr. thought he might get in regards to Hillary Clinton?
Look, I think it's very clear in reading through his transcript that he thought that this meeting was about some information, perhaps damaging to Hillary Clinton, to her campaign. But it's clear that about 20 to 30 minutes into the meeting, he says the meeting lasted about 20 to 30 minutes, he got frustrated because he realized that perhaps it wasn't what he thought this was going to be about. And then he's asked this question by one of the committee members, what he thought this was about. And they ask him information on Hillary Clinton, and Don Jr. says yes. And then the question then goes on to say information on Hillary Clinton on that came potentially from Russian government. And his answer is, again, I had no way of assessing where it came from, but I was willing to listen. The committee members had made an issue of whether or not he knew who this lawyer was, whether or not he knew whether she was working there and whether she was there on behalf of the Russian government. But Don Jr., clearly they're saying he had no idea. And as we've been reporting, this meeting was set up by someone he knew, Rob Goldston. And so he thought he was just generally taking a meeting with someone who knew someone who had information about Hillary Clinton.
Okay, Shimon, stay with us. Let's also bring in our legal experts here. We've got Shan Wu with us, who is our CNN legal analyst. Also with us, our national security analyst, Steve Hall. And gentlemen, I also want to not read the full part of the transcript for you, but tell you something else we've just learned from it. And that is that in this testimony under oath to the Senate Judiciary Committee, the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., says that he walked in on a meeting at Trump Tower between then Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and senior advisor, and then National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. This was at Trump Tower after the election. Significance here is that the president's son, Trump Jr., had not previously acknowledged witnessing this event, not acknowledged certainly walking in. He says he doesn't remember, Steve Hall, he doesn't remember if he had a conversation or exchanged much or spoke to the then Russian ambassador, but that he may have shaken his hand. Steve, the significance of that to you?
I think the significance of all of this, Poppy, is we're continuing to see these lines that lead from the Trump team back to Russia. And I think these transcripts give us a little bit more texture, a little bit more context in all of that. And, from the Russian angle, as I have written, and I think several of my former colleagues who are familiar with Russian counterintelligence have written, it's virtually impossible, or at the very mildest, extremely unlikely that either the team that was led by Veselnitskaya during the Trump Jr. meetings or the Kislyak meetings, that Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin were simply unaware of these things, or hadn't directed or hadn't used these as part of a larger attempt to get into the Trump campaign. It's just not feasible, even if you believe the transcripts when they say that the primary reason for the meeting, at least according to the Russian side, were these adoptions, and it turned into an issue about the Magnitsky case and the Magnitsky Act. Even if you believe that, there's no way that these guys were freelancing, that Veselnitskaya and the whole team just said, hey, let's go do this. This had to have, there had to have been knowledge from the Kremlin on this.
And Shan Wu, we're just learning again that Donald Trump Jr. walked in on a meeting at Trump Tower after the election where the Russian ambassador to the United States, Kislyak, was there meeting with Jared Kushner and Michael Flynn, who would become the national security advisor. Meetings like this, from an ambassador and a transition team wouldn't necessarily be unusual, assuming that the administration knew about it. Usually this is coordinated through the State Department and the like. But the more you learn this new information about, hey, this meeting happened and this person was there and we had this conversation. Oh, I forgot about that conversation. It does, show the various threads at play here, Shan.
It certainly does. And in some senses, an analogy to what Steve was saying is that it's hard to believe that within the Trump team that there wasn't communication about these ongoing meetings with the Russians. And the idea that later they're attempting to deny that they happened, or they were unaware of it, or they were compartmentalized, it really just doesn't hold up. I mean, for example, going back to the transcript of Don Jr., where he says that he takes this meeting, he lets Jared and Paul Manafort know about it, but to his recollection, he doesn't really tell them anything about the substance of the meeting. I just think that's rather unlikely. I mean, these are busy people. You're not going to just come up with a random meeting and not even tell them what the value of the meeting might be or what the substance is. There has to be more communication between them, and if there is, then it's very likely that that communication specifically was talking about these Russian meetings.
A point of factor that's important from this testimony that Don Jr. gave, he was asked by one of the members of the committee, did you go into that meeting when you saw Kislyak and Flynn, and Kushner meeting in your office in Trump Tower in December of 2017, after the election, 2016 rather, did you go in? He said, no, I did not. They said, why not? And he said, because I didn't know what it was about and I was sweaty from the gym. But he saw it, he may have shaken hands. And then months later, in March of 2017, as you read at the beginning of the show, he said, did I meet with people that are Russian? I'm sure I did, but none of them were set up, not that I can think of at the moment. It's sort of this progression, Steve, that we've seen on his answers about meeting with Russians, seeing meetings going on between Russians and the team, et cetera.
Yeah, the most benign interpretation of this is that, yeah, you've got busy people, but by the same token, when you have Donald Trump Jr. saying, look, the reason I took the meeting, my entire motivation for taking the meeting was because there might have been dirt on Hillary Clinton. Again, if you're looking for a benign interpretation of that, some people have said, well, political neophytes, don't understand who you can talk to and who you can't talk to. But still, I would think commonsensically you would say the Russians or a foreign adversarial power, probably not the people that you'd want to talk to. Even about this type of, that type of information. And you're right, the meetings with Kislyak, Kislyak, I don't believe he was a spy master. He was certainly the eyes and ears of Putin on the ground in Washington as being the ambassador. Not entirely out, completely in left field that he would have met after the elections with the transition team. But again, in light of all of the denials on the part of the Trump team, it does sort of stand in stark relief to what we're now seeing actually happened.
Shimon Armanuraju up on Capitol Hill hearing from Democrats, and one of the things they're focused on is a phone call to a blocked number. Donald Trump Jr. pressed on a phone call to a blocked number, a phone call that he made after a conversation with the Russian, Ayman Agalarov, who was key in setting up these meetings here. And Donald Trump Jr. says he can't remember who that phone call was with, this blocked number. The question, so you don't know whether or not this might have been your father? Donald Trump's Jr. answer is, I don't know there. Again, this idea of the block number is something we've heard from before about the Democrats and resurfacing today.
Yeah, it is, and this has come up before, obviously, John. But here's, who would know that probably, the FBI and those investigators, because they could simply pull those phone records and see if, in fact, if he was talking to Donald Trump, his father, or who he was talking to. There is this time gap here that is interesting, and that seems to have been a focus of some of the members of the committee, and certainly a lot of questions have been asked about that, and how is it that he doesn't recall. But this is something that we know that the special counsel and the FBI has been looking into. They've been looking into this meeting. They've been looking into what the White House's response was to the meeting, why it changed. And like I said, I think certainly these kinds of phone records and email records and communications records would be something that the special counsel would have in their possession.